How can stress be a good thing?
Yeah, I completely agree that I think society has kind of put this uh, weird spin on stress and made it just bad. That we should be inoculating ourselves from stress. And I totally disagree with that. I think it's really about like the number one thing is I think framing stress, and I think how we frame it. If we are, I'll use an example of like a stressor that could be good or bad depending on how we frame it. To use cold, for example, cold immersion. If I'm going into a 40-degree cold tub, which for most humans is going to feel really uncomfortable, and their body's going to feel really unsafe in that temperature. But if I go into it saying, okay, this stressor is going to help me, I'm going to release dopamine. It's going to help my immune system. So I basically frame that stressor as positive. That will end up being a hormetic stressor in that it doesn't kill me, but it's making me stronger. So assuming that you're staying within the parameters of safety and all of that, very important. You're not getting hypothermia. Like this is about just like, a couple minutes in this cold tub with the goal of promoting, positive stress. Now, if I were to go into that same situation where I get pushed off a boat into 40-degree water and I'm trying to survive, that's going to be a bad stressor, right? I'm going to perceive that stress as negative. As a result, it's going to manifest negatively in my system and probably not be a positive response or adaptation. So our mindset going into the stress is really important. And I think you bring up such an important point that we need to start to think about stress in our life as an opportunity for growth. And I think it's important to note that I think folks have a different default kind of mindset around stress in general. And that would be something that's worth unpacking at a kind of individual level is like, all right, how positive and optimistic do I feel about the future? Right. And you can kind of look at Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, which is great. There's people kind of either go left or right. But you want to try to go, if growth oriented and thinking, positively about the future is to the right, we want to try to get to that as much as possible. So, and that's something that you can kind of train. And Shawn Achor's work is absolutely amazing. And it would be worth linking. He was a Harvard professor and done a ton of work around happiness, but really gives a lot of really useful tips and tricks on how to kind of frame the world in a more positive light. And a lot of that is, entry points are awe and gratitude, but kind of that is a pathway to kind of improve our perception of just the world around us and look at the world through a more, positive lens. I think helps us kind of think about stress more as an opportunity for growth as opposed to something that is going to kill us. So that's, I guess, a quick framing of stress.
Wonderfully said. And I think, a lot of us, a lot of people listen to this podcast and others because they want to become stronger and more resilient in some way. And I think that there can be sort of this paradoxical, I want to be stronger. I want to be fitter. I want to be more resilient, either mentally or physically, but avoid the conditions that actually create that strength, right? Like the cold therapy, right? It's like the cold therapy, it's uncomfortable every time I get into my bathtub with that ice that I've dragged in from the gas station. I'm like, this is going to suck. Every time. Totally. And I'm like, do I really need to do it this time? I already did it last time. You have that little, like all these little, but I get in anyway. And afterwards I always feel amazing.
Yeah.
But these are the conditions that actually create some of that grit, right? That cellular grit, whether it's mental grit, physical grit. So I think leaning into the conditions that actually forge strength, right? I think is very important. And some of those things are very stressful.